Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you for coming to our annual review today. The Sikh PA annual review, we were started in 2015, and so we've been doing our annual reviews yearly to explain to Sangat exactly what it is we do, our achievements throughout the year as well, and also so you can hear from Sangat organizations that we've worked with and hear a bit how we've worked with them as well, and sort of what our dynamic is when we work with these organizations. So we're just going to get started. We're not going to sort of do a very long introduction.
Although we would like to thank the RBS Sikh Network for hosting us today. Thank you very much for that. It's always nice to get a beautiful venue like this, especially when it's free.
So first of all, who are we in terms of people? So Jasveer Singh is the senior press officer, and then you have myself, Sukh Sodhi, who is the junior press officer. So Jasveer Singh's been with Sikh PA since the start, but I only started last year on a part-time basis, and then I moved to a full-time basis at the beginning of this year. So the day-to-day running of Sikh PA, the day-to-day operations is us two. And then our co-founder is Rupinder Kaur, who's sitting here at the front. You'll be seeing and hearing from her a little bit later. But she co-founded Sikh PA with Jagraj Singh, and she has a advisory capacity as well as an oversight capacity.
So Jagraj Singh, as many of you will be aware, passed away last year in July. He was the co-founder of the Sikh Press Association along with Rupinder Kaur. He was also the visionary and driving force behind Everything's 13. The Sikh Press Association is an organization powered by Everything's 13. We're one of a number of their projects, which include Basics of Sikhi, Mighty Khalsa, and Kiddy Sangat. So we are a Sangat-funded organization through Everything's 13. We have an advisory board which you can find out more about through your slides, through your handouts, which should be in your hand. And we were created with three very basic aims. The first aim is to raise the public profile of Sikhs. Second is to empower the Sikh community with media skills, which we do through one-to-one interactions and media workshops. And we also provide media with a source for facts, resources, and we do this largely through promoting articulate Sikh speakers. Okay, so we're going to move straight on to the very first campaign that we're going to talk about today, and it's one of the most important campaigns that we've worked on over the last 12 months.
So this is the Free Jaggi Now campaign. It is dealing with the case of Jagdar Singh Johal, who was abducted by Punjab police back in November of last year. He's a British citizen and he hasn't been charged yet. There's been no independent medical. He's been denied private consular access. There are many miscarriages of justice that have taken place with regard to Jagdar Singh, and there's been a campaign ever since he was abducted to get the British government to pressure the Indian government to ensure that there is a fair trial and a fair process. And some of the things that we've been doing as Sikh PA is being that link between the campaign and the mainstream media. So this is something that has been in the news quite a bit. It's featured in Parliament as well. And what we've been doing is explaining to the media about this case, but crucially providing them with live updates. So if you go to our website, there's a Free Jaggi Now page. It has authoritative updates that the mainstream media now depend on. At the last check, it was something like 24,000 words. So we've been providing over the last few months thousands and thousands of words on a regular basis that media can trust, that they pick up on, and what it does is it makes their job easier to write articles without this sort of authoritative fact base that we check with the Free Jaggi Now campaign. We check with his brother, for example. We check with other people in India and in Punjab. It means that press can find it easier to write about what's happening, and also they know because it's been something like 31 court appearances now. It's been over 100 days, over 160 days in fact. So when you're dealing with those sorts of numbers, very easier for media to get things wrong. Very easy when he's been taken in secret, for example, to court for people not to know what's happening. And what we do is liaise with people, liaise with the main Free Jaggi Now campaigners to provide that accurate information to media.
With the Free Jaggi Now campaign, through the things that Sukh has described, we have managed to obtain press coverage all over the world from groups like the BBC, Al Jazeera, Huffington Post, and on a regular basis, the Scottish national media. We're going to have Shamil Singh up now, and he's going to tell you a bit more about how the Sikh Press Association have supported the Free Jaggi Now campaign. Shamil Singh is a speaker for the National Sikh Youth Federation, and he is also one of the lead campaigners of the Free Jaggi Now campaign.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much to Jasveer and Sukh. Sikh PA has been instrumental with the Free Jaggi Now campaign in allowing us to amplify our voice as a community, to challenge oppressive state narratives, to challenge state propaganda. Why does the NSYF work with the Sikh Press Association? When both of them, Jasveer Sukh, asked me to come speak here, asked NSYF to come speak here, you know, I was thinking about like why do we work with the Sikh Press Association? Because this National Sikh Youth Federation doesn't often work with many Sikh organizations because we have a very particular point of view, and we've had very deep links into the community at a very grassroots level, and it becomes very difficult for us sometimes, especially in places like that's called the so-called mainstream, for us to have those conversations. And Sikh PA has been incredibly instrumental in that. NSYF works with the Sikh Press Association because of the ideology behind it, is because of the far-reaching vision of individuals like Bhai Jagraj Singh. It's the publicity for the Panth. We are the Panth, right? What's important for the National Sikh Youth Federation is Sikhi. This is the central thing to us. This is why the Sikh Press Association is important to us as an organization as well, because it represents Sikh voices authentically. It connects with us as a community at a grassroots level and helps amplify our voices and bring our voices to a larger audience. Sikhi is the main important thing for us. It's the central idea. It's what we're most concerned about, and it's Sikhi that's attacked. When it comes to the media, when it comes to, especially with like the Jaggi campaign, it's Sikhi that's attacked by the entirety of the Indian press. We have articles that were published in the Hindustan Times calling people that were retweeting the Free Jaggi Now campaign terrorists, and that they were monitoring everyone who was retweeting this campaign, and that they were considering blacklisting everyone. So in that kind of environment, the oppressive environment where we have internalized the trauma of genocide, and we kind of we need that larger context. And Sikhi is being attacked, and Sikh being is being attacked in, you know, in these kinds of situations. We've seen with the Canadian media, especially when it comes to any conversation around Khalistan, it very quickly goes from these guys Khalistan is about Sikh separatism, to the Khalistanis are religious radicals, to they're terrorists, they're extremists, they're fundamentalists, they want to, you know, destabilize India, they want to destabilize Britain, they're backwards, you know, religious radicals. So it becomes very important for us and it becomes very important for us to have these conversations. I want to give you two very specific examples relating to the Free Jaggi Now campaign. One of them is, there was a conversation that Virender Sharma, who's a Labour MP, had when he went to India, funnily enough. He was in India, and this was with the BBC News Punjabi. And it was really important how this news was positioned and how it was brought out to the Sikh community. And because the news was designed to be for the Sikh community. It was on BBC News Punjabi. It was about having a credentialized platform. As a community, we'll latch onto the logo, the idea of the BBC, and say this must be authentic, authoritative coverage. So our community in Punjabi are watching this, and the interview with Virender Sharma, who's a known pro-Indian government politician. He has one of the lowest attendances as an MP, lowest voting records, but he'll always vote in the favor of India. These are all like facts. You can look up, you can research his voting records. It's all public information. In that interview, he spoke in Punjabi. And in that interview, he explained and defined what Sikhi was. He talked about Sikh concepts. He tried to explain what Sarbat da Pala was. He tried to explain to Sikhs, as this credentialized individual, as an MP, what Sikh ideology is, what Sikhi stands for, why you know, these fringe elements, these radical religious extremists, aren't representatives of Sikhi, but in fact, Virender Sharma is. And he gave his Sikh credentials. We often call it in the NSYF, we call it giving your Sikh CV. Whenever somebody speaks in a Panthic position or in a Panthic platform, why people come into Sikh spaces as well, it's a very interesting thing. You know, like Sikh MPs, that type, they come into Sikh spaces because they want to build their Sikh CV. So in that thing, he gave his Sikh CVs. I've studied Guru Granth Sahib, I've studied Sikhi, I've studied this. I know a lot about like Sikhi and Sikh ideology. Sikh PA, you know, fortunately enough, they're very educated individuals. They're bilingual, they understand the language, they understand the nuances of the culture. And they pulled that interview up immediately. They sat down, they transcribed it, they pulled all of the information out of that video. And what we ended up with was a transcript. And with that transcript, with NSYF, we are able to share our expertise, we are able to share our knowledge, and we are able to pull out the issues from within that transcript that showed where, in particular, Verinder Sharma was distorting factual information. And as a result of that coverage, as a result of that positioning, that conversation, that BBC News Punjabi pulled that interview with Verinder Sharma. It's no longer available. So that's one very specific example. Another one was the Indian Deputy High Commissioner, Dinesh Patek, who went on BBC Asian Network and made factually incorrect statements. And he made actually very threatening statements to the Sikh community. And again, in a similar fashion, we were able to work with the Sikh Press Association to challenge specific factual inaccuracies regarding Jagtar Singh Johil's cases, and to challenge that misinformation and that false narrative. And we were able to call him out. And mainstream newspapers, I think there's a one run by Sunny Hundal as well, Barfi Culture is a new one, that picked up on it. Other newspapers were picking up on this conversation that was happening. They were picking up that there's dissent within the Sikh community, that they don't accept what the Indian state is saying regarding them. And we know with Sikh PA as well, the conversations that happen around Khalistan, they give us a platform to share, our voice. And it becomes very important for us because within the Sikh community, internally within the Sikh community, those Sikhs that have nirta to the Guru, that are close to Guru, that are close to the Seva and Gurdwara, they are within the center of the Qawm, they form the Panth. And then on the periphery, we have people that they identify themselves through various different labels. I'm a self-identifying Sikh, or they're from Sikh family backgrounds, and they form the periphery of the Sikh community. And on the periphery, we have interpreters, academics, journalists, MPs, etc., and governments, and people that work within governments. And from the periphery, they try to explain what's happening within this alien, backwards, potentially religious extreme environment. And it becomes very important for us because we are then able to position ourselves also in those same spaces and challenge those conversations, challenge those interpretations, and challenge where people are speaking from. From the National Sikh Youth Federation, we have one agenda, and that is Sikhi, is Guru and Panth. And sorry. Yeah, our agenda in National Sikh Youth Federation is Sikhi and Panth, and that is what's most important to us. And we have no other agenda aside from that. And what we find often within organizations, within individuals, is they have an agenda. They have a party political agenda, or they have an agenda that they have to present themselves as biased in order to speak about our community, that they cannot show a bias. You cannot say, I am a Sikh and I'm speaking on behalf of Sikhs because I think Sikhi is the best. It becomes very difficult for us. You have to remove that bias to communicate in the world, and you have to show that I am, in modernity, I have no bias, I've left my religion behind, I'm a neutral individual, I don't actually think Sikhi is the best. All religions are one. Universalism, modernity, it forces us to strip away what makes us Sikh. And for organizations like the National Sikh Youth Federation, it becomes very important for us that in those environments that we are able to present an authentic Sikh voice. We are able to present an uncompromising Sikh voice that places Guru and Panth at the center, and wants to bring Sikh ideas out into the world rather than bringing ideas from outside and try to latch those on into our community. And that's what often happens, because the individuals on the periphery become credentialized, authoritative voices, and they'll go out into modernity, into society that's dominated by whiteness, and they'll bring those ideas back into the Gurdwara. They'll bring those ideas back in the community and make them legitimate. When we go into the Gurdwara, we know that the Guru is the most central thing. We know the Guru is the most authoritative. We know Guru is the highest seat of authority. If the Queen came into the Guru's Darbar, a Sikh knows what the hierarchy is. We know that the Queen doesn't have any power over Guru Granth Sahib. We know the Queen is a worldly ruler who has. We know what Gurbani says, Rajeshi Maqaddam Kutte, that we know that rulers like the queens, like politicians, they're not impartial. They're not able to speak from a position of humanity, from love, from daya. And Guru allows us to reject all notions of anybody's authority except for the Guru and the ideas from Guru. So this is why we work with the Sikh Press Association. This is why it's important that we have a Sikh Press Association. As we've seen in Jagtar Singh Johil's case, whilst talking about this case, whilst talking about Jagtar Singh Johil, the Indian government has consistently attacked our very image. National Sikh Youth Federation has written a report about this as well, about how there's ongoing repression, about how our identity is being criminalized. So it becomes very important to have very strong counter voices to that, because we're affecting narratives going forward. We internalize these ideas. So I'd like to, from National Sikh Youth Federation, the work that Sikh Press Association does is absolutely phenomenal, and we should support them as much as we can. And we should remember what the Sikh Press Association is set up to do, is to provide, is to work with the Sikh community, to provide publicity for the Panth, and to bring Sikh ideas out into the world and show that we are equal partners on the world stage. We don't have to strip away Sikh notions. We don't have to strip away our identity to fit in, to navigate these spaces. We can bring our culture and our ideas out, and we can challenge any arguments that take place, as we've seen with the Free Jaggi Now campaign, a very small team. I'll tell you a small anecdote about the campaign once we're having a conversation. That the Free Jaggi Now team is perhaps maybe 6 people, to 10 people. It's a very small team. At one point with Jagtar Singh Johil, he was surrounded by 25 police officers while he was having a conversation with his lawyer. And we were laughing that we don't even have that many people in the Free Jaggi Now campaign team. But still, with such a small team, with the expertise of the Sikh Press Association, with their proactive nature, their willingness to go out and reach out and use the expertise to help the Sikh community, we are able to form a campaign that that had communicated to the entire Sikh diaspora. And one thing that's really important, we saw Sikhs all over the world raise their voice, right? We saw like Jagmeet Singh in Canada, we saw like Sikh MPs in the UK. What was the one thing that was the one thing in common to all of that was Sikhi, and it shows that when it comes down to it, no idea of nationality, no idea of any nation sovereignty can stop Sikhs from uniting. And we saw that in the Free Jaggi Now campaign. Everybody that raised their voice for Jaggi was because he was a Sikh, because Sikhi was being attacked. And that was the most important thing. And it was fantastic and phenomenal to see in this day and age. And politicians, like, we were monitoring. I'm sure the Sikh Press Association was monitoring as well. The response times, we know it took Jagmeet Singh like 16 days to respond, because within the, the environment of his political party, he has to find a position of how to respond correctly. We were able to respond much, much more faster. We don't have any paid staff. We don't have people that are speechwriters, professionals, all the rest of it. And we are able to respond with such agility and counter narratives that were imposed on us. And it shows the entire diaspora uniting to show that we are united as Sikhs, that this is related to a larger context. It is connected to Sikhi, it is connected to our sovereignty, it's connected to 1984. These are still incredibly important ideas for Sikhs. And to provide that narrative and to help the younger generation to understand these ideas. I think that's all I have to say. On this, yeah. Thank you. Sorry if I've ran over. Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So thank you so much to Shamil Singh of the National Sikh Youth Federation for letting you know how we support his organization, and also the Free Jaggi Now campaign. I think the most important thing I would say take from that is absolutely vital for the Sikh Press Association to connect with those authentic Sikh voices, those that are on a grassroots levels, in our Gurdwaras, in our Sikh student society, speaking to the Sangat. Those people are as important, if not more important, than any other Sikh that might have a status because of political allegiance or business association or anything as such. So there's one more. There's a 2-minute video here directly from Jagtar Singh's brother. This is Gurpreet Singh, and if we're okay to play it. Okay, maybe not. Okay, we're not going to watch it sideways, so okay, we'll move on, I guess. But that's Jagtar Singh's brother, Gurpreet Singh, who was expressing very similar sentiments to Shamil Singh. Moving on now to our regular campaigns. There's 4 very regular campaigns the Sikh Press Association runs, and Sukh Singh is going to tell you a bit about our Vaisakhi campaign.
So Vaisakhi is probably one of the only times in the year where people out in the streets, non-Sikhs, get to see Sikhs in the street together. And that's the Nagar Kirtans. And up and down the country, as we've seen the last few weekends, there have been Nagar Kirtans, and invariably these get picked up by the press, and sometimes they don't as well. So for the Sikh Press Association, we have a few aims when it comes to Vaisakhi as a whole that we carry out each year. The first is to get the narrative correct. Last few years, even last few days, in fact, the press will constantly say, the press will constantly assume that Vaisakhi is the start of the Sikh New Year. And anybody that's read any Gurbani or knows anything about calendars will know that the Sikh New Year does not start with the month of Vaisakh. Vaisakh is the second month of the year. And that's something that ITV made that mistake yesterday. The Times made that mistake 2 days ago in the newspaper as well. These are mistakes that mainstream media outlets, the ones that if you polled people on the street and said, could you trust the Times to give you correct information, they would say yes. And the Times is telling you Vaisakhi is the Sikh New Year, and it's not. So saying that Vaisakhi is not the Sikh New Year is the first thing. And then we want to tell people what Vaisakhi actually is, the Sikh Vaisakhi, the foundation, the manifestation, the fact that Khalsa became Paragat then, the fact that, it's about Panj Pyare, and it's about Sikhi, and it's about, the Panj Pyare from Bhai Daya Singh all the way to Bhai Himmat Singh, all the way to Bhai Sahib Singh, sorry. And you can get that information from the Sikh PA website, and it's information that we proactively give to journalists. We help journalists out. We want to make their lives easier when they're covering the Nagar Kirtans, because otherwise they will get things wrong about the Panj Pyare, because they'll see them, they'll take a very colourful picture like the one above, they'll use it in a newspaper, but they don't have the information to go with it. And our main aim as the Sikh PA is, in this case, to provide the accurate information for journalists and to help them out, but also to call them out when they get things wrong.
So some of the coverage that we obtained last year, there's always too much to fit on a slide and, to be honest, to fit into a 1-hour presentation. So this is just a brief summary, but looking at video and online coverage and print coverage from Slough newspaper, covered by ITV in, I believe that's in Wolverhampton. We have regional news coverage by the BBC on the real meaning of Vaisakhi, and that's as the creation of the Khalsa, across all BBC radio stations. So whether it's BBC Manchester, BBC Leeds, BBC Coventry, that's something we very commonly get around this time of year. We've got it for 2018 also. And wider coverage in massive news outlets like the Metro newspaper. And what we try and do is to give you guys a good kind of glimpse of how valuable our work is. We try and put it into a PR value. PR value is a public relations value. It's essentially the cost of advertising space. This is positive news coverage about the meaning of Vaisakhi and essentially who the Sikhs are. How much would this kind of coverage cost if you went to a public relations company and said, I want to get 10 newspapers to cover this, and I want to be on 10 different newspapers. So our PR value that we surmise would be, this campaign would be worth the PR value of £200,000. Moving on to Langar Week. No town here yet. So Langar Week is one of our is actually the campaign which we started with. Rupinder Kaur and Jagraj Singh, they sat together in 2014 and they thought, what can we do to kind of publicize Sikh philosophy to the masses, and how can we showcase that? And they came up with the idea of Langar Week. Very simply, it's 1 week dedicated to publicizing both the impact and the philosophy behind Langar. This is one of our greatest successes as an organization, and it's something that we very regularly receive a lot of coverage for and a lot of good feedback about. So this is a very brief summary again of the coverage that we received. As you can see, masses of newspapers, particularly a standout for me was Manchester Evening News. It's the biggest newspaper in Manchester. For them to cover Langar, that would have gone out to tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands in Manchester. Again, radio coverage in across Canada as well on Red FM, I believe the station's called. TV coverage by BBC East Midlands, that's covering the Nottingham Langar Seva group, and events in India, Canada, USA, England, Scotland, Wales, Spain, and I believe there's probably more if I dug deep enough. Now, again, if you go to a public relations company and say, we want to organize a week-long series of events in approximately 7 different countries. We're going to get radio coverage, TV coverage, newspaper coverage. What they're going to look to charge you is around £500,000, and that's the PR value of our Langar Week campaign of 2017. Moving on, so Jbeil Day.
So Jbeil Day, as we know, is related to the concept of Jardi Kala, and is honouring the Shahidi of 5th Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj. And this is something that a lot of people, especially outside the Sikh community, have no idea about. And we thought, this is related to this idea, this Sikh concept of Jardi Kala, which is pretty unparalleled in terms of normal society nowadays. And we wanted to really communicate that. It's good that it falls in June, usually nice hot days as well. You can give nice pink coloured drinks out, and essentially what we do is we use Jbeil events where local Sangat in each of their respective areas, they give out Jbeil, they give out these drinks, and they give it to passers-by as well, and they use it as an opportunity to educate about Sikhi, and they also use it as an opportunity to explain some of the concepts of Sikhi, such as Jardi Kala. And what we do is we facilitate those events nationwide. So this time it was 24th of June last year. And what we do is, by having that day where we can coordinate absolutely everybody around the country to do that, that makes media more interested in it. Because if there's just one Jbeil event going on in your hometown on one day, but there's another one going on in another week, or there's another one going on at another time, then media don't think it's part of a broader thing. One of the things you have to do in terms of getting media coverage is to package it as something. And this is part of what we do in PR. By creating Jbeil Day, we get Sangat involved, but we also sell it to the media essentially. And we say to them, listen, this is just one event in a local town that's part of a broader national, even international occasion, and this is why you should cover it. And they buy it. This is what they like. They like a big event. They like a transnational event as well. They like the fact that the GOM, the community as a whole, are coming together to do something, rather than a few people setting up a stall, which is what it usually is in individual locations. But it's a collective power that really sells Jbeil.
So Jbeil is essentially a way to kind of promote the Sikh philosophy of Jardi Kala, as Sukh just said. And this can be often hard to translate to the media, and therefore it's not always the easiest thing to get media coverage of. However, in 2017, because of masses of support, it was the most successful Jbeil Day campaign by far that we've ever seen. An example of this is Sikhs in Kashmir, as you might be able to see in the middle is the Kashmir reader. They picked up on it, and this is something that they also ran with, and you saw it covered in the biggest newspaper in Kashmir. At the top you can see it was covered in Cyprus, where Basics of Sikhi went out, and they held a Jbeil Day event in Cyprus. This is the Cyprus Mail that it's on up there. You can see the Sunderland Echo. Quite a few different newspapers. One of the standout things that actually happened was there's a podcast called the Food and Psychology Podcast, which is listened to by thousands. They heard about the event and they wanted to know more about what Jbeil actually means and the concept of Jardi Kala. So quite a bit of good coverage here. Again, just a brief summary of the kind of coverage you got. I think what stands out is at the bottom, it says we had coverage in India, Australia, which was in Sydney, Canada, Vancouver, and Toronto, USA, that was California, across California, and I think it was only in California actually, all across England, in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Copenhagen we had Sangat to take part, in Cardiff, and in Barcelona also in Spain. So again, if you turn to a PR company, a public relations company, and ask them to set up one single day off events in capital cities such as Sydney, Cardiff, London, Copenhagen, Barcelona, they're going to ask you for something like £400,000 on top of the coverage that obtained. So this, for me, was our most successful Jbeil Day ever, and I was delighted with the way it went. Jbeil is something that has been a tradition of the Sikh community in modern times. You see it happening by Gurdwaras intermittently, usually. I think even the other day I saw Gurdwaras handing out cool drinks just because it was, I think, the first hot day of spring. So it's our way to use these actions of the Sikh community to simply further education and understanding of the Sikh community.
So one of the other campaigns we run is Bandi Chhod Divas, which is basically commonly referred to as Diwali in the mainstream press, and everyone's seen the paragraph in a newspaper which says Diwali is celebrated by Hindus for XXX, and it's also celebrated by Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and a few other groups as well. And that's basically all that is covered, all that is given towards the Sikh meaning for Bandi Chhod Divas. For Us, we know that it has a very different meaning. It has its root in Itihas and for Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, and that's something that we want to communicate as well, freeing the Hindu Rajas at the same time, really getting historical examples of Sikhi and of equality and all of the things that Sikhi is really about, and really selling them to the media in the modern day. And that can be quite hard on an individual basis. So again, what we're doing is creating a campaign, creating that factual information and putting it in one place on our website so that it's easy for journalists to cover. Journalists, when they have something like this, they don't want to be going around doing their own research, especially if it's in another language, especially if it's about a group that they don't really know about. And so what they need is that guarantee of authoritative information. They're very reluctant to just go to random people as well. So what we've been doing over the last few years is really cultivating a relationship with journalists and with publications and media outlets. So before it was just about, oh, Bandi Chhod Divas happens, Diwali happens, they want to find somebody. Now we're letting them plan a bit. They can come to us in the run-up as well. We can even fact check for them before it goes out for publication. And this is what you're seeing sort of with the work that we're doing. It's about changing a media narrative over time. It's developing that relationship, establishing that relationship. And that's something that takes place over time and doesn't just happen in 1 year. And this is probably one of the biggest results you can see with both Jbeil Day and Bandi Chhod Divas is that we're really getting into the mindset of those who are writing in the media and those who are covering these things in the media, letting them know we're out there and just really establishing that relationship with them so that we can guarantee them good and accurate content.
With all of that said, it's actually still very difficult to have the media focus on Bandi Chhod Divas directly, because when it comes to Diwali, they've got all of these bright, colourful events, fireworks displays happening. And when it comes to the Sikh community, we're saying, well, talk about our philosophy, talk about that since the times of our gurus, we've been fighting to free political prisoners. And that ties into things that we're doing in the modern day. This becomes a lot more of a complex and in-depth story than media are willing to cover when it comes to festivals. And with that in mind, again, it was quite difficult. So moving forward, if there is a way that the Sikh Press Association would say that we can kind of expand and deliver more coverage on this, it comes from internally within the Sikh community. We need to think outside of the box. We need to do our own events, which will have us be as appealing as the general kind of events that you see being held around for Diwali. So this year, essentially, in 2017, we were able to influence an article by the Evening Standard. We also sent out guidelines en masse to the media. And with that kind of thing, you can't even measure how many news organizations are going to pick up on the guidelines that you've sent out. For example, we do have a really good relationship with the BBC religion team. As I've said before, we for these kind of events, these kind of festivals or dates, we get a lot of good radio coverage. When we send out guidelines to them, we find their news readers, their presenters on their Sunday morning shows are reading our guidelines word for word and putting them out there. But in the sense that we didn't have much direct interaction with any other organization other than the Evening Standard, we're not going to chalk this up with our PR value. Non-public facing work. Now, I'm not sure how many of you can read that, but what we've done so far is gone over all of the campaigns that we do. So 4 main campaigns, but that's what we do. That's kind of open and obvious and transparent. And you guys are seeing the work we're doing, and you guys can react to kind of the media coverage that comes out as a result of it. But there's also work that we do behind the scenes, and there's masses of it that people don't see, and that takes up a lot of our time. For example, just running through these very quickly, we're supporting Coventry Sangat in a dispute with GMP Gurdwara and the Charities Commission. We are doing that in a way where we are just making sure that their messages are succinct and what was going on was not getting confused in the media, because people might be aware there was an article in the Coventry Telegraph that came out last year which said Sikh extremists were promoting ISIS propaganda. It's like a real kind of paradox, right? Sikh extremists promoting ISIS, they're quite confused. And they were obviously confused, but they were confused because they'd taken an interview of one person and they'd taken his word for it that something like this was actually going on. So what we had to do then is go round up the Coventry Sangat and en masse have them speaking to the local newspaper and saying actually nothing like this ever occurred, and the article was very quickly changed within a couple of hours. Clarification on media use of the word Sikh. We spoke in great depth with the Daily Mail and the Sun. This was based on the fact that there was an article that came out last year talking about a Sikh gang running a passport scam in the Afghan community. This is something that we wanted clarified in the media about when is it okay to use the word Sikh and when it isn't. Because, for example, Harry Atwell, the hero of the Barcelona terror attack, the man who was pictured stopping during the midst of the attack and helping an injured child, he's Sikh. He went on Good Morning Britain. He said, my actions were because I'm a Sikh. This is what we're taught to do. None of the articles, none of the headlines mentioned him as a Sikh. They said British hero. But when it comes to criminal acts, they focused on the word Sikh there. So we clarified them with this. This did go up online on a website. It's quite in-depth because they did get quite intricate in about when they feel it's okay to use. And to be fair, from our side, the only thing we can say is that they addressed all of our questions. And that is on our website and is something that, you know, I think is valuable for all people to read, how these major mainstream organizations, what their thinking is when they're using this kind of terminology. Hiring, so we hired, as you can see next to me, a very capable young press officer. We went through quite a lengthy process in doing this. We're actually talking about hiring someone to work alongside myself full-time since around 2016. Obviously, a lot of things happened within the organization that meant this got delayed, but we spent a lot of time speaking to quite a lot of people, and yeah, that took up quite a lot of time of the Sikh Press Association. Supporting academics is something new that's come about this year, really, in the last 12 months. Through connections with academics, one of whom you'll hear from later, people have been directed our way when they're looking to speak to people within the Sikh community and understand certain Sikh community sentiments. And we've done this for Sussex University in quite a lengthy process, and also Brunel University. As well as that, our base remit is kind of advising Sikh organizations and individuals on community projects or when they're trying to project a Sikh community voice. But to tell you a little bit more about how we work, the kind of work we do behind the scenes, which a lot of you may not be familiar with or may not see, is Mankamal Singh. The picture you see is actually from an article in BuzzFeed News, which came out in 2017, in the last 12 months, about Sikh attire and religious clothing, if you will. So that's another thing that we did with Mankamal Singh. And Mankamal, you'll join us. And
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Before I say anything, before I start, I do want to pay tribute to Bhai Kulwant Singh, who's Shamsher Singh's father, who passed away recently. Now, he's been very modest, and I know he hasn't mentioned anything about it, but Bhai Kulwant Singh gave a lot of sacrifice to the Sikh community for us as a Qawm. He was a Sangharsh Singh. He was an advocate of Sikh rights, of sovereignty, and for that he spent a lot of time in prison. And out of that was born organizations such as SOPW and other groups that looked at Sikhs in prison. So, you know, I just want to pay tribute to those giants, because we stand on their shoulders of those giants, and the Sangharsh Singhs always deserve our respect. So, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Yeah, to move forward, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned when you started, because I remember that quite clearly. It was More London, EY. You had your launch. Rupinder, I remember you speaking there. I remember Jagraj there, and there were quite a few of us, perhaps people sitting here, but we were all sitting in there thinking, okay, well, this is it. You know, this is what we always needed. We needed an organization that joined the dots. We needed an organization that spoke on our behalf. Yes, you know, we were engaging with the press, but it was very much centered on individual groups that were engaging with the press. It was centered on Jathebandis, organizations, but there was nothing that was coordinating the voice. There was nothing that was working together. And that's what Sikh PA brought to that space, which we never had before. So, you know, in 2015, was it 2015? When did you launch? 2015?
Officially launched in 2015, but we started our first project in 2014.
Well, official launch, and that was one of the great things about Jagraj Singh. His vision, he was a risk taker, he was a trailblazer, and I take a lot of inspiration from that as an individual as well. Often, you know, I didn't sometimes used to agree with his approach, but the thing about Jagraj is the fruits came later on, and you could see that investment that he put in to the community, that investment that he put into these organizations, we are now seeing that manifest itself amongst these activities that are taking place amongst us. Back in 2015, actually, Sikh PA put me forward for an interview with London Live. Remember, Rupinder, we went to the studio together, and it was an interview on TV about the effects of Islamophobia and the demonization of the turban and how it was affecting Sikh children. There was an issue that had taken place, I can't remember if it was Canada or America, where there was a video where a child was on the bus and he was being called terrorist. And that impact was felt by us all. And to be honest with you, we've grown up with that. We know what the demonization of the turban is all about, whether it's because of the current situation with what we see in the Middle East, whether it was 1984, whether it was a racist agenda. You know, I think I've always seen an agenda against the turban, whether it's National Front, whether it's you know, the Indian media and the elites of India, or whether it's you know, what we see today in terms of the media spinning things and the right wing re-emerging in a different guise. So that's always existed. We've always had to battle that. But we are stronger. We are a community that has 70 years behind us here in the UK. You know, we have now the education, the means, the skills to tackle this, to tackle that narrative, to explain that narrative from a Sikh perspective. You've got Shamil, who eloquently talks about sovereignty, talks about Khalistan, not in a way that we need to hide anymore or feel that it's something that we can't discuss. It's open, it's an agenda item, it's out there now. MPs know about it, politicians know about it, and we're moving in that direction. So there's more confidence coming out, and this is where these organizations like Sikh PA help immensely. One of the great things that that I'm really grateful for Sikh PA to do was around about the time, just when Jaggi was arrested and the Free Jaggi campaign was in its early stages, when the Indian media was coming out with all that propaganda, there was an item that was released in India Today, which showed the image of a British Sikh with a Pakistani historian, but they called him an ISI agent, and they said Sikh terrorist meets ISI agent. Now, I knew that individual. That's Bobby Singh. I know Bobby Singh. I mean, many of you may know Bobby Singh from Birmingham. You know, Bobby Singh is an active Sikh. He's involved in history. He's an active historian. He travels to Pakistan. He's part of the Anglo-Sikh Heritage Trail. He's working with me on the Sikh War Memorial, and is a personal friend. And when I saw that, straight away I got in touch with Jasveer, and we spoke about the whole thing, what that meeting was all about. It was a meeting with Isnan Nadeem, chairman of the Dayal Singh Majita Trust in Pakistan. Now, this is a trust set up by a great philanthropist and Sikh, Dayal Singh Majita. And it was a trust still being run in Pakistan, and he was the chairman of that trust, so they were still loyal to that trust. Ironically, Dayal Singh Majita set up the Tribune in 1881. So the Tribune newspaper was set up by Dayal Singh Majita, but that was the context of that meeting. It was a meeting in Pakistan. It was a historical meeting. It was a meeting about Sikh history, and it was just a meeting that took place back in 2004 or 5. I can't remember now, so long ago. But that's how it was just put out there. That propaganda was put out there. Jasveer worked on it. Jasveer put the narrative out there. It was picked up. Sunny Hundal picked it up. Barfi Culture picked it up. And other news agencies picked it up as well. Now, we wouldn't have had that platform otherwise. We wouldn't have had that connection. We could have put out individual tweets, but had it got that traction, I don't know. But, you know, so again, you know, that was something that Sikh PA was able to do and take forward. That picture you see was from Vice, BuzzFeed, I'm afraid, sorry. And it was an article that they done with myself and my wife, Devinder, about Sikh attire, about Sikh clothing. So it was an opportunity for us to talk about the star, to talk about Bana, and to talk about Kirpan, the way we want to express what the Kirpan is about. And what was really good in that article is we were able to express what that Kirpan actually meant to us, even to the point that Devinder's Kirpan that she was wearing was my grandmother's Kirpan that she wore, and it was passed down in the family. So these kind of narratives and nuances and family traditions are something that we don't get an opportunity to talk about. So we could talk about that, you know, that we are wearing kirpans that have got significance in our families because they have gone and passed down generations and generations down through Sikhi, through the kakars as well, being passed down by grandparent to grandchild. Sikh PA's put us forward for various BBC radio interviews on Amrit. One of the ones I did a few years ago now was about the growing number of young people taking Amrit. And when I was part of the Gurdwara committee, I could comment on that. And this wasn't, you could say it was anecdotal evidence, but it was real evidence that I could see that there were younger people who were coming into Sikhi that were taking Amrit. When I took Amrit back in 2004, I was 30 years old, and the next oldest person to me in that Amrit Sanchal was probably 60. And there was 8 of us, I remember, that took Amrit. And the Panch Pyare just focused on me all the way through because I think they were just happy that there's someone young with a black beard taking Amrit. Now that's changed a lot. That has changed a lot. A lot of you have come into Sikhi, you know, thanks to basis of Sikhi, thanks to the prachar that is out there now. A lot of younger faces. There are a lot more people confident to have their Sikhi Swaroop, the Malle, the stars, open daris. All these things were not there 5, 6, 7 years ago, you know. So things have changed a lot. And that was something I was able to discuss on various different channels to say, yes, that identity and that affiliation with that identity is growing, and that bond with Amrit is growing within the next generation. Academic research, as Jasveer mentioned, is something that he's put our way. Brunel did a recent piece of research on mental health and faith leaders and how mental health sits within faith groups and how equipped faith leaders are to understand mental health. The reality is probably very little, I'll be honest with you. I've been in the Gurdwaras, I understand what faith leaders see and how they see mental health. And it's certainly not helpful when someone is suffering from mental health and they come for advice in the Gurdwara. Our community are ill-equipped, they've got their preconceptions, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Particularly Gurbani talks about mental health. Gurbani mentions mental well-being. It's such an integral part of who we are. So while we have those misconceptions, it's a breakdown in communication. It's a breakdown with that relationship with the Guru. Sussex University conducted a piece of research on sex-selected births. And it was a quantitative piece of work. Another university was doing the qualitative side. And they wanted to know, is there still an issue? Is there an issue in the United Kingdom with Sikhs about sex-selected births? Is there sex-selected abortion taking place? And the build-up behind that was relationships, how we view gender, how our experiences of having children. I've got 2 boys and a girl, so we've been through both the genders. We've seen the community perception, we've seen family perceptions. So we could discuss that, we could understand that, and there were challenging questions. There were really challenging questions about contraception, about other things that I'd never ever thought about, and it put us on the spot. But we need to be having these discussions. We need to be engaging with academics. We need to be thinking about it ourselves as well. Where does it sit with us? Where does it sit within Gurmat? So it put me on the spot, believe me. Advocacy. And this is something that very few people see, what Sikh PA have done in the background. I mean, some of the things we've talked about, but sometimes there are issues that don't need to become issues. There are issues that can be buried. There are issues that can be, not say buried, but resolved. And recently there was an incident, I won't go too much into it, there's no point then talking about this, but I think Jasveer, you handled that impeccably, that specific incident, because I reached a point where I was actually ineffective. But Sikh PA coming in on this and resolving that issue before it became an issue was great. And that's the clout that Sikh PA has now. It has clout. It has the ability to intervene and stop a situation from becoming a situation. And that's also very important. And the education through media, what you're doing through Vaisakhi, Jbeil, and Diwali. I mean, Atom Academy, which I'm one of the founders of, we adopted that straight away because it was a great it was a great thing to do with our children. And we had National Jbeil Day. We got great coverage by Ilford Recorder, and the children loved it. And that day we had a Department for Education inspection as well. So we had a school inspector. So everything just worked well. We just gave him lots of Jbeil as well. So the novelty was there. It just worked so well that day. But when we explained what Jbeil was about and why we give Jbeil, I think, for him, he was just mesmerized by it all. He just thought it was great. That's really all I want to say. That's my involvement and how I've been had the opportunity to be involved with Rupinder, with Jasveer, with Sukh. They've helped us. They've supported us. When Artham Academy is a free school, a Sikh free school in East London. When we had our Nipathar, we had our groundbreaking ceremony. Sukh kindly turned up. I was really grateful for that because I sent the invite to a lot of Sikh organizations. And I will always remember the ones that did turn up in the end. And, we would have got coverage that day had it not been for Pride. So I think we clashed with, is it called Pride London? So we weren't colourful enough, unfortunately. But we would have, there was interest, but had it not clashed that day. But that's the kind of work and that's the kind of connections that Sikh PA do on our behalf. So just to reiterate, we're joining the dots now. We're working collectively. We're becoming more coherent, and it just adds more strength to our voice. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you so much to Kamal Singh for that. I just want to pick up on what you mentioned about Bobby Singh. That was a massive learning experience for me in dealing with the media. Essentially, just as he said, Indian media blasted out an image of a Pakistani historian and a bunch of Sikh historians that had a meeting in, I think it's like 2013, in Pakistan, and without any evidence or even, to be fair, they probably knew exactly what they were doing and that this wasn't the way they were portraying it, but they just blasted out Sikh militants meet ISI officers or operatives or something like that. And when Kamal told me that this is just a meeting of historians, I was like charged up. I was like, right, we're gonna put the Indian media in their place now. And we blasted it through social media, which, to be fair, is where it had most traction, and everyone picked up on it. And the Indian media must have felt very embarrassed by the expose. But British media, when I turned to them, I was like, look, you have to run this story. This person, there's a guy sitting in Birmingham who, out of nowhere, millions of people are looking at his face, and he's being called a terrorist, a militant, and he's just a historian. You've got to speak to him and find out kind of what he thinks about this and why this has happened. British media turned around to me and basically said they weren't going to do that because they didn't want to get involved in some sort of slanging match, some sort of internal conflict or debate within Indian communities. That was their position. That was actually their position. You won't find that article covered in any BBC or ITV, any organizations like that, simply because when the Indian media are posting out such kind of information, they don't want to be the ones to put the counter information out there, not just on the behest of the word of the Sikh Press Association. And for me, that showed me we're in a very murky world. It's a very dangerous kind of game that is being played out here, where the Indian media essentially can do what they want, and there's no one there to hold them to account. We obviously, what we try and do is galvanize that natural, authentic grassroots response, which we have social media for as a platform. And we have to remember social media is a bigger platform than all of your BBC, ITVs, and anything else put together. So that's something we always have to use. Moving forward. Empowering Sikhs with media skills. So if you saw our 3 aims at the start, you saw that our second one was empowering Sikhs with media skills, and we do this in quite a few ways. We do this with media workshops. Now, if anyone here is part of a community or an organization that thinks they need a media workshop, they could do with some media training, just the basics, how to speak with the media, how to write a press release, for example. We are going to be moving that forward into how to conduct interviews at some point this year. Please do get in touch, because personally I feel not enough organizations or even Gurdwaras or even Sikh communities or in any sort of localities, they're not doing that enough. They're not reaching out for our skills where we can help them connect with the media. One place that did was in BC, in Canada. We held a media workshop, myself and Jagraj, with some professional journalists out in Ontario in 2016, and I didn't want to leave it over 1 year before we did it again. I had an opportunity while I was out there, and we took it. We had national award-winning journalists with us, Bal Break and Bhupinder Hundal, and we sat down with members of the Sikh community, including Sikh society, Sikh student society leaders of local universities, and we empowered them with media skills. And I've actually seen the fruition of that in moving forward. This month is actually Sikh Heritage Month in BC, and I saw the work that they've done, and they were able to get TV coverage on some of their events because of it. We were also invited to the Sikh Youth UK Sevadar training event to do the media side of training. That again, I implore anyone here that's part of a Sikh organization, that's something that we can help with. If you're holding a Sevadar training day or a recruitment day for Sevadars, there's probably ways that they can help you through the media, whether that's social media, whether that's through writing skills, and that's something that we're here for. Call us for it. That's what Sikh Youth UK did. They have done it for the last 2 years, and that's brilliant. That's using us for exactly what we're here for. One-to-one advice and direction. There's probably quite a few of you here in the audience that have had that from us in terms of connecting with the media, and also statement writing and editing for Sikh organizations, which as recently as just last week we're helping with when it comes to issues of public concern. Events. Okay, so something that was quite new to the Sikh Press Association in 2017, in essentially our second year, we thought it was time we started holding open forum discussion events. This came after we held a Sikh community hustings. We held that to allow a platform for Sikhs to give their own perspective on why they should vote any particular way, whether that be Labour, whether that be for the Conservative Party, or whether Sikhs should actually vote at all. Following the feedback from that, which was overwhelmingly positive, we thought we need to continue holding such events to allow these discussions happen in public spheres. So when the media turns around and says, so what are the Sikh community doing about, let's say, mental health issues, what's going on there? And these open forum discussions allow people that are working in those areas the platform to discuss with Sangat what they are actually doing, what they can be doing, what they should be doing, and what is actually going on now. So these are the events we've held in the last 12 months. Then it's the Sikh Community Election Hustings, a Sikh presentation by somebody you're just going to hear from in a second on so-called Sikh radicalization, a Sikh Community Mental Health Insight, and an event on Khalistan and media depictions of Khalistan. And we're going to be holding a lot more. We're going to be touching on a lot of serious topics. Do please get in touch if there's something you think that we should cover. And when we're doing so, we're also always looking for venues. So if you have any way you can help with that, please do get in touch. But to speak a bit about more how these events help, you're now going to hear from Dr. Ajit Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for everyone for turning up. Yep, that's me. That's the only decent photograph of me. That's one you kind of tend to see on social media. So we live in interesting times, Sangaji, and I'm the nutter who decided to do the project on Sikh radicalisation, which is since when my dari has turned slightly white. And the role of Sikh PA was key as part of this project. So I started the project in September 2016 actually, oh my goodness, yeah. And I was doing my research. I didn't just want to be an academic who researched the community, as Shamil said, from outside, checked to these kind of weird people, saw what was going on, and then reported back to the powers that be. I was always interested in engaging with the community and talking about my findings as they emerged, to actually see if I was getting the right picture, as I say, as opposed to just kind of writing what I thought. But the issue is, how do you do this? How does somebody from the outside gain legitimacy and say, you know, yeah, I'm someone you can trust. Come and talk to me, please, or let me at least report back on what I'm finding. And as we've said, there are lots of Sikh orgs out there, but there are very few independent Sikh orgs out there. And the few independent Sikh orgs that are out there, some of them are generally one-man bands that don't really do very much. So independent Sikh orgs that actually do stuff are few and far between, one of which is the Sikh PA. So the way in which the event in September came about was I I held an event in June. I was invited by the Sikh Education Council in June, July of last year to hold a talk about my emerging findings, which Sukh and Jasveer attended, graciously supported the presentation, thought it was definitely worth listening to, and then they said that they would put on a similar event in Southall. Now, you know, lots of people say they do stuff, but Sukh and Jasveer actually did put on an event in Southall in September 2017. And for me, the fact that having it in Southall was key, because it wasn't, you see lots of community consultations taking place in arenas which aren't really open to the community. So people say, yes, can we talk to the Sikhs? And they'll invite you to some hotel in central whatever. But the fact that it was in Southall was imperative, because it meant it was actually in the heart of the community. I know some of you here attended that as well. And I found that event key to my research, because it really was a case of me saying, this is what I've done, this is what I found. What do you think of it? Now, I know in setting the event up, Sikh PA did get some flack on social media. I got some flack on social media because it had radicalisation in the title. And the whole point of that was that the term Sikh radicalisation had already been defined or determined by Indian media in particular. So it wasn't as if I was coming up with a term myself, but it was a case of actually understanding what the realities of this actual phenomena were. So having the event in Southall, allowing for open and honest feedback, not streaming it online, which again we got flack for, because we wanted to make sure that it was a closed event where people could actually say what they wanted to, was really, really valuable. And feedback I got afterwards, people were saying, yeah, you know, this is one of the few events where we've actually been able to talk about a very difficult topic. There were people in the room who'd never been in the room together before or hadn't been in the room together for ages. And if anything comes out of my research, I want it to be more of these sorts of conversations. I think for too long we've relied on the community leader to represent us, the guy who says this is what the Sikh perspective is, as the speakers have already said. But the way you get beyond that is by saying, here you go. This is the community. You know, more of these sorts of events, getting stakeholders in. If you want to understand the Sikh perspective on mental health, domestic violence, sexual abuse and grooming, come and talk to us. Sit in front of a room full of us, and we'll tell you what we think, as opposed to there being one particular spokesperson. What else have I got written down? Yeah, so I didn't expect my work to be so necessary so quickly. You've all seen the headlines in Canada since the start of the month, which have basically been the same sorts of headlines which led to my research, which we saw in the UK in November 2015 around the dossier and around terms around Sikh radicalisation. The Canadians, I feel, faced a much stronger barrage, and the difference was that their barrage wasn't from Indian media, it was from domestic Canadian media. So it was very different. But you can kind of see the visionary aspect of Sikh PA in that this was already established in the UK. So the media in the UK no longer have an excuse. They can't say, you know, who do we go and ask? Where do we go? Because it's here. Sikh PA is here. You go and talk to the Sikh Press Association, and they'll forward you on to a relevant speaker. The Canadians didn't have that at the time, and having had this barrage of headlines, of negative headlines in the last few months, they're now looking to establish something very similar. So Jagraj Singh and the team certainly were ahead of the curve in actually establishing these sorts of organisations kind of before they were needed to this degree, but it really did help in this kind of context where our narrative is, people are trying to define our narrative for us. And the more I'm working with stakeholders and policymakers, and the more documents which I'm asked to review, which go to policymakers, the more I realise is that there's a lot of work to be undone. A lot of work to be undone. I've said this before, you know, when people migrated to the diaspora, to the West in the 70s, they often used terms which they felt people would understand, to the detriment of our own terms. And it's time for us to regain our own terms, because we don't do ourselves any favours by using terms that don't belong to us, because they don't mean the same thing. And I'll use my favourite example of a Sikh temple. What is that? What is that? Because then, you know, if we need to talk about the Gurdwara and talk about the importance of the Guru to us. So there's a lot of work that still remains to be done. And everyone in this room can start that work now by ensuring that we use our own terms when we're talking about ourselves. And if somebody wants to understand what a Namadari Sikh is, they can look it up. You know, we're not baptized or whatever. So that's the first thing. And I think the Sikh PA will play a key role in defining this narrative. I, as an academic, have made it my mission not to use the word Sikhism anymore. So if you read my report, I use Sikhi all the way through. If somebody doesn't know what it is, that's what we call it. That's what we call it. We call it Sikhi. So yeah, let's be more confident about our own terms. And that's it. Yeah, this is how we get. This is how we get beyond it. This is how we talk about ourselves more. The media is becoming more and more important, and the role being played by the Sikh PA will grow. It's definitely something that needs supporting. As I said, if we talk more as a community, and I think we are mature enough. You know, we have clearly challenged that whole narrative about Sikhs not being able to sit in a room together and talk about things. We've done that. We've done that loads of times. The whole thing about Sikhs are crazy and they can't discuss things without fighting. It's not true. We've done it loads of times. Let's carry on doing it. Let's make sure we talk about issues before they become incidents. Honestly and openly, whatever the issues are. We're at a mature level. We can now own our narrative, and organisations like the Sikh PA help us do that. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasveer Singh. Okay, so now we're going to just look at our kind of general coverage that we've obtained throughout the year, which we would classify as positive coverage. There's quite a lot of it, but we're going to just speed through it very quickly. Sukh, if you want to touch on this.
So this is a feature article. This is a feature piece for the Indy 100. And many of you are probably familiar with the Indy 100 and how it works. You can basically bump stories up, and this one, what it's like to travel as a Sikh man, actually got into the top 20 at one stage worldwide, which means you're talking like 100,000 at least views, that sort of level. And this came about because we challenged an inaccurate story. If you remember, there was a Sikh man on a flight in America, and somebody had Snapchatted pictures of him without his consent, and they sent it around saying, oh no, the flight's not going to make it, or pray for me, I don't think we're going to make it, and insinuating that he was a terrorist. And essentially what the Indy 100 did is they ran the article about this campaign, but they said this is what it's like to travel as a Muslim man. And the guy wasn't a Muslim, he was a Dastatari Sikh. And we challenged them. And we said, actually, your headline is inaccurate because it just totally neglects Sikhs. It totally erases all of the issues and all of the problems that Sikh men who wear the dastard face. And exactly, people think they're Muslims. And so this went on for a while because the Independent, the editor, was very, very reluctant to back down. And this took up, over a day, easy. This was dozens of emails being exchanged back and forth. And again, we didn't know whether this would lead to anything. This was 2 days worth of work. And eventually, we not only got a correction, but we got a right of reply. We got the opportunity to write our own article in the media. And so this is where our knowledge of Sangat organizations comes in, because you don't want me or Jasveer Singh to write about ourselves. Sikh PA doesn't exist to just talk about us. We have to reflect Sangat. We have to reflect the Panth. And so we're racking our brains thinking, okay, who can we go to who will provide us at very short notice with an article or with a story that even we can draft? And so I turned to the guy who's sitting right here over there, Kanwar Singh from Khalsa Aid. And it's because he wears very bright dastard, travels in a dastard all the time, and flies all the way around the world doing Seva with Khalsa Aid, a charity that many of you will know. And Kanwar said, okay, I'm happy to be a part of this. But he didn't write it, and instead I ghostwrote it on behalf of him. So if you see here, it actually says by Kanwar Singh, edited by Indy 100 staff. And I think Kanwar won't mind me saying that he didn't write a word. Actually, he told me the story, and I ghostwrote it on behalf of him. But he told me exactly what he wanted to express and the sentiment he wanted to express. And this is something that we as Sikh PA do, If you don't want to write your own feature, if you don't have the time, for example, I think Kanwar was flying out on a mission as well. The guy's got his own seva to worry about. That's what we're here to do. So I wrote this piece, and actually one particular paragraph of this piece went viral, and it was the bottom paragraph, and it was the paragraph that Kanwar had stressed most to me. He said, when I get attacked, when I get these sorts of incidents, I don't say I'm a Sikh, I'm not a Muslim, because that throws Muslims under the bus as well. And as Sikhs, we don't do that. And so what I did was, that was the defining sort of theme, that was the narrative throughout the piece, and the last paragraph was very explicit about it. And I was actually really surprised to see that people who had no idea of Sikh PA's involvement in this actually screenshotting that last paragraph and sending it around on Twitter. And again, you know, we're telling you now, the Sanghat now, for the first time that we had a role to play in this. But if you just saw this article and you shared it, you wouldn't know on the face of it that Sikh PA had anything to do with it. And this is what we do. We work behind the scenes with Sanghat organisations. We facilitate that. You know, we're not here to get the media ourselves. We want the media to be shining on the parts of the Panth that deserve it.
So more positive articles and positive PR, as we call it. This one, I think this is one of our biggest successes ever. This was a absolutely awful slanderous article which compared Sant Janel Singh Khalsa Pindrawala with Ram Rahim Gurmeet Singh, the I'm not even sure how to describe him, the guru, if you will, that went to jail last year in India. And it was full of not only inaccuracies, it was full of a very obvious bias in terms of how they wanted to portray Santji. We've already spoken about the NSYF. The NSYF regularly create content which challenges these kind of narratives. One of their guys is called Jasveer Singh, and he's a brilliant writer, somebody who's written for the Sikh Press Association several times before. So we reached out to him. He was already in the process of writing something. We went to the Huffington Post and said, look, you've had this article out there, and for us it completely inaccurately portrays a Sikh saint, and therefore you give us the right of reply. And they did. And in these images, what you probably can't make out, which I probably should have highlighted, the top article, the original article, has 2,800 shares. Our response, which we helped facilitate with the NSYF, got 10,500 shares. So essentially, we just completely ran over and trampled their article with a truthful article, essentially. And that's something that I was really happy to do, because happy to see happen, because the original article was just so disgraceful, really. And that's something we want to do more of. The last two things you've seen are essentially kind of feature writing, column writing. That's something that we really need to focus on a lot more. The start awareness in the Falklands. So we had a VG who's in the army in the Falklands approach us and say he wanted to hold a turban awareness day, if you will, a turban day. And we helped him get the language right, and we helped take that event, which he held, which was just in a couple of schools in the tiny Falklands Island, and blast it out through all of the army's media using terms such as the Star, and giving more of an understanding about the Sikh faith and the value of the Star to Sikhs. Grenfell Tower.
So one of the things that we have to do is budget our time. And Grenfell Tower is a perfect example of what it's like working in media. Nobody knew when they woke up that day on the 14th of June what was going to happen. I was going to go into office, and I actually thought it was going to be a quiet day.
It was your first day?
It was my actual first day in the office. And as soon as we got to the office, we realized this was a much bigger story. And in the office, we said, listen, we're Sikhs. We can't just stand here and do a normal day's work. We've got to go out. We took some bottles of water and tried to do some seva where it was sort of needed. And when we were on the ground, we saw that we weren't the only organisation, us and Base of Sikhi. Carl Said were already there, Sadnam Moti and SWAT were there as well. So many organisations, there were dozens and dozens of us. And what happened was, talking of Grenfell, and what happened was media were there. Media swarmed in, media loved it. And essentially what they wanted to do was get reaction from different communities about the role they were playing on the day. And so you can see BBC Radio 1. I didn't even know I was on BBC Radio 1. That was taken as a clip from another interview I did, and I only found out because my friend was driving home and heard my voice on Radio 1. And this is the sort of thing that we were doing. And it really showed the value of a two-man team, a two-person team, because Jasveer Singh stayed in the office and took all the general phone calls that were coming into Sikh PA, and I was on the ground with the Seva organisations. So Jasveer Singh would phone me and say, I've had a request in from BBC, where exactly are you? And I'd say, I'm on this street, okay, I'll go and find them. And the fact that one person was sort of a little bit removed from it, doing all that coordination, and I was on the ground with Seva organisations, giving them interviews and putting them to interviews, meant that we actually got over a dozen interviews on that day. And then in the aftermath as well, when there was writing about the whole Grenfell Tower, and it happened for weeks and weeks, we ensured that there was a narrative there of Sikh organisations providing langar. And not just providing free food. Lots of people are providing free food. But why is it langar? Why do we call it langar? What is a Sikh concept of langar? And that's something that journalists were very, very sort of surprised to know. I used to open the interviews, with, even for BBC Asian Network example, and say, this is just an extension of what you can get in every Sikh Gurdwara. And journalists would say, no, I didn't know that. And then we actually followed up. We said, go to a Sikh Gurdwara on a normal day, and you can see that there's langar there. And this was one of the events that actually we ensured that the response from the Sikh community was actually represented. You see this picture here, mosques are opening their doors. So you might think this is not sort of a very big deal that we got this corrected in the end, but you can see that that's Shepherd's Bishop Gurdwara that's pictured. And it's all, and the fact that it has a Nishan Sahib outside it marks it out as a Gurdwara. That's the whole point of a Nishan Sahib. And what it shows is real religious illiteracy in the media, that they don't know what a Nishan Sahib is. They just see a dome, they see probably a gold thing, they see something that's definitely not an office block, but it's quite religious, and they think it's a mosque. And we have no problem, obviously, mosques aren't bad, there's nothing wrong with a mosque, but we're here to ensure accurate representation of what a Gurdwara is in the media, and that's one of the examples that we used in the aftermath of Grenfell.
Yeah, so we had so many media requests, and I think it comes down to the Sikh identity, essentially. Our Singhs stand out so much that when they saw them coming on mass to help, they want to know, how come there's so many of them? Why are they doing this? And that gives us the opportunity to talk about Sikh philosophy. And I think the main thing to remember here is that the requests came into us. There were dozens of them, and it's not within our remit to say, we want to keep this undercover and they're just doing this. The Sikhs, the Khalsa, they stand out. They stand out for a reason, and this was a chance to emphasize that philosophy of the Khalsa through the tragic incidents at Grenfell Tower. The partition of India, it was the 70th year anniversary. Something that we've started doing more of, which you might have seen, we started creating, if you will, AJ Plus style videos. These are these short, concise, factual videos where we just put out a bit of information. They're usually like 2 to 5 minutes long, and we've gotten a lot of good response. For example, this video went out about 5 facts on the partition of India for Sikhs, and it got 90,000 views. It was talking about how people like Neeru mentioned that there would be a separate consideration for the Sikhs during the partition and things of that nature. What we also did is promote work going on within the community to highlight the Sikh belief, the Sikh feeling around the partition, one of which was an exhibition held by Narvision, an artistic group, I think was the best way to describe them, and we had that covered on BBC Radio London. Moving forward, more campaigns. Anyone who knows me personally will know how much this meant to me. I'm a massive boxing and MMA fan. It was actually when Sikh PA first started in 2015, some Singhs turned to us and said, look, we need to tackle the beard ban in amateur boxing. What this essentially means in a Sikh keeping his gears could never compete in any event like the Olympics, for example, Olympic amateur boxing, because you have to trim your beard to compete in amateur boxing. In 2015, I was like, definitely, that's something we should work on. We didn't have any case studies. We didn't have any Singhs out there that were keeping their gears and were thus being prevented from competing. A few months ago, I think it was in around November 2017, Lions MMA came forward and said, well, actually now we have loads of case studies, and we've already begun the dialogue with England Boxing, the official England Amateur Boxing Association, to get this changed. And we're kind of at a stalling point, and we're just going back and forth with them. So they had us involved, and essentially what Sikh PA do in these kind of situations is let those that we're dealing with know what this issue could turn into. This is an issue of public concern. This will be something that will be massively talked about and supported within the Sikh community, and therefore you want to kind of get your skates on in terms of dealing with this. We brought in people like Dr. Ajit Singh, who gave medical backing in terms of the beard is not a health hazard. We also brought in Amandeep Singh, who's a lawyer by trade and was able to speak to them from a legal perspective. And it was literally a case of 2 emails later, they got in touch with myself and said, we're going to overturn the beard ban. This is something that's been in place for, I believe, 138 or 39 years, and it was overturned within about 4 months through just dialogue, where that Sikh PA was actually just able to facilitate between upstanding members of the community that know how to deal with this kind of thing. It got really good media coverage straight after that. We're talking about massive sports organizations and outlets like TalkSport, like BBC Sport, like Eurosport, all covering it. And they all covered it from the perspective of these doors are now open for Sikhs. And Guru Kripa, there's lots of young Sikhs out there that are going to read this and be like, oh, that's great. You know what? Now I want to get into boxing. I want to get into these kind of sports. So that was one of our biggest things that we worked on this year also. This was quite an interesting one. I really pushed for this. Ajit Singh won a case to wear his bana at work in central London. Once this was changed, we got in contact with local media, regional London media, and said, do you want to interview him? They said yes. Unfortunately, timings didn't work out. And by the time he was free to make, because we have to remember, a lot of these media interviews will happen like they want you in the studio at 5:45. People are finishing work at 6 p.m. It's just not possible. They want you in the studio at 1 p.m. It's just not possible. But it was something that we pushed for hard on, and I was pleased to see that there was an opportunity to have these kind of stories covered. Guru Nanak's Gurpurab, regional radio coverage with Dr. Jasveer Singh, Sukh Singh from Seek to Inspire on BBC West Midlands Radio, BBC Radio London also covered it. One of my favourite bits of coverage was the unveiling of Midlands Langar Service Langar bus on Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Gurpurab, on his birthday, if you will, which BBC came down and covered. And so that was a way of covering both the celebration of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Gurpurab and also the great work of Midlands Langar Seva. And that was a feature news piece that was about 5 minutes long, which you can still find online. So when we do all of this work, when we're looking at getting positive PR coverage, one of the things that we always try to do, and it's not just for the token representation, it's because of the fact we have lots of very articulate, very knowledgeable and very powerful female voices within the Sikh community. We always try and put them forward whenever we get an opportunity. From my perspective, these opportunities don't come enough. Sometimes we put calls out there, and if the same old faces aren't available, one of them would be Manjit Kaur, they say Sukhvinder Kaur from SOPW, Sun Kaur from United Sikhs, probably a couple of other names. If these people aren't available, we don't get enough Sikh women stepping forward to be in the public eye and do radio interviews or speak to a newspaper about a Sikh community issue. But this is something that we always push for, and to speak about that, we're going to bring forward now Manjit Kaur of a fantastic organisation called Binti.
So Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's an interesting one because I'm going to talk about periods and menstruation. And I think the relationship that we've had with Sikh PA from the beginning has been one that has been very supportive. I remember when I first started my work, I didn't really know how I was bringing Sikhi into the work that I was doing. And I remember having a conversation with a Sikh man who said, you know, you're doing seva, don't you? And I said, well, I'm just helping women that need help. And then I always believed that we don't have any issues around menstruation in our Sikhi faith, that there is no restriction on anything that we do as women. And I kind of blindly went through that in my first year. And I think coming up to about 18 months, there was an article suddenly in Times of India which suggested that there were some gurdwara around the world where women weren't allowed to do seva while they were menstruating. And I just was really thrown by it, thinking, oh, I never knew this, and you can't actually do kirtan when you're on your period. I mean, where does it say any of this? And I remember speaking to Jasveer actually quite early on when we started, and he'd just started and I just started. And it was really important to have someone that can speak to the same generation that I'm speaking to. I have an interesting story where I went to India with my mother for the first time, and I had said to her, look, when I go to Punjab this time, I'm going to be doing my work. I'm not going to just go and sit in my mama's house or go for a cup of tea. And I went as an adult for the first time, and I interviewed lots of girls, and their stories were horrific from the products or the things that they used because they didn't have access to menstrual products. And then I gave the video to my mum, and I let her listen to the videos in Punjabi, and she grabbed the phone and she threw it across the bed and says, "Tu jarur inna ganda kam karna? Do you really have to do such a dirty job?" And I thought, wow. And I was really shocked. 6 months later, I was due to go on to a Sikh television channel, and I went to my mum's house the day before. As you do, it was cold. I was wearing like a really tatty clothes because I was just in my joggers or whatever, and I wasn't expecting for there to be guests at my mother's house, but we had guests, and my mum said, make sure when you go on television tomorrow that you wear proper clothes. And I said, Mum, you're worried about what I'm going to wear. I'm worried about how I'm going to speak to Uncle G, who had a big white beard, about menstruation. And then this really funny thing happened, because Uncle D the next day, he commended us on our work, said how important it was, mentioned the fact that we shouldn't have all of these rituals where perhaps we don't touch pickle, or we don't go to the Gurdwara, all of these cultural things that we've confused with our life. And she said, oh, my daughter, my daughter. And I think that's the journey that we've had, even when we go into the villages on the ground. We do go and speak to the mother-in-laws, we do go and speak to the daughters, because it's really important to get all generations to get an understanding of why menstrual health is important. The other thing that I remember quite clearly about when this article came out in Times of India, I remember thinking to myself, well, I need to speak to the leaders of the Gurdwara. I need these people to stand up and talk to our community. And I spoke to the president of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Gurdwara in Southall, and he said to me, oh, we can't talk about this controversial topic. Oh, it was during elections as well, obviously, so that was probably one of the reasons. But it's just mind-blowing that something so natural, something that Guru Nanak Dev Ji has said allows females and women for us to be equal, is such a topic that we cannot put out there. And Sikh PA have helped tremendously all the way through. Whenever we need to articulate something, they're there. It's not an easy topic even for Jasveer to have, I'm sure. He wouldn't want to talk about periods, or if I put him on the spot, he might not even be able to explain the menstrual cycle, but it's important that we have organisations like these to help us push our message forward. We've also worked with Bible Ajit Singh, and we've done an interview with Basics of Sikhi to highlight what our religion actually says about menstrual health and equality for women. So I feel very blessed to have their support. They did also ignite the media publication of Sikh great women through society. We did an article, I think it was in December time, and then there was another one where we basically included every single Sikh woman that had made any difference to our communities and our lives. And it's really important to recognise that if we are living in an equal society, and if our religion dictates that we are equal, then we do put ourselves forward and we realise. And I think some of the other things, and these are things that I would never have talked about before, but because I do travel to India quite regularly, I sometimes feel that as a Sikh woman, if I was to support all of the topics that are going on around the world, am I going to make it safely out of India? I also know that while I was growing up, I always had this convincing notion that if I was ever in trouble, I could go to any Sikh man and he would help me. And I remember when I arrived in India one time and all the flights were cancelled and I had no way of getting to where I needed to get to, and there was nobody awake at home, I decided that I was going to head out to the bit outside departures where all the Sikh families were, and I was going to ask some mama to take me to Punjab. But luckily, by the time I'd finished my conversation, I couldn't actually find anyone, and then I headed towards the taxi rank. But again, I headed towards the Sikh man standing there. And the interesting thing, and this is something I'll never forget, was this Sikh man was not the typical Sikh man that I was accustomed to. He'd obviously smoked, he had orange fingers, and it was just a different type of Sikh that I'd experienced in my life. And I think that's kind of really important to bring that message across, because ultimately we live in this society where we feel safe because of these notions of what our religion or our culture or our parents have told us. But do the next generation know that if they're a Sikh man and they're wearing a turban, that this is what they represent? This is the kind of person that I would go to if I needed help in a strange land. I think it's really important that we have these conversations, and it's with organisations like Sikh PA that can do that. So again, I'm not sure if there was anything else that I can add. But Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you so much, Manjeet Kaur. Okay, so just going over a bit more of the positive PR coverage we've gained. You can see for yourself. I won't go through every single one, but standout for me is coverage on BBC London News of the National Gatka Championships. It gave a great opportunity to Gatka teachers to speak about the philosophy of it. And it's on our YouTube. If you have a click, you'll actually see some really insightful interviews there. Also here, coverage of the Without Shape, Without Form exhibition in Guru Manir Granth Gurdwara in Slough. That also was covered on the radio by BBC Berkshire and BBC Asian Network. We covered the 5-year anniversary of the Oak Creek, Wisconsin Gurdwara massacre. Had that covered on BBC Radio as well, but that was on the BBC Asian Network. We worked with the Sikh Council on helping to draft public responses for the Drayton Manor Kirpan ban, and it was eventually overturned as well. And of course, Jasveer Singh, who you can probably see here in the audience, putting him forward as a voice of the Sikh community for what he does. And as often happens in these kind of situations, the media, if they find someone that they like, that's a good voice, they will stick with that person. They'll keep that person's number on their records, and they'll be in touch regularly, as they have been with himself. More coverage, Turban Awareness Day, a Sikh channel event in Parliament, coverage for Holla Mohalla, just recently, an event in Willenhall. So much more I could cover. The one to you is your right corner. You can see that funny image of when the Chinese official state media put out a video basically mocking Indians by mocking Sikhs by putting on a fake beard, a turban, and just doing some funny stuff. What we did is we went to the BBC and said, you need to include this response about how that portrays the Sikh community in India. And one of the standout things which made everyone kind of raise their eyebrows is we mentioned as part of that statement, because it was a media issue, so we made our own statement, is that the Sikh community is less than 2% of the Indian population. And yet we stand out so much that this is, the kind of abuse that we're used to facing, and that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. Not many people were aware about how small the Sikh population is in India. Tomorrow, 10:45. Send the messages out now. Put it on record. My Turban and Me, a documentary which we help facilitate with Top Hat Productions, involving groups like Basics of Sikhi, National Sikh Youth Federation, Southall Gurdwara committees, and a few others. Just putting them forward. So this is a documentary based on the modern day meaning of the start to the Sikh community. And that's something that we help facilitate, which you can see tomorrow on 10:45 on BBC One again. So all of that, you're looking at, if we go back, you're looking at like half an hour worth of media coverage. And why this is such a big number for PR value of everything we've just shown. According to the media executives we've spoken with, approximately 30 seconds of primetime mainstream coverage can be as much as £200,000 for 30 seconds worth of TV coverage. It can be, we kind of summarize that we put it down to £50,000 per 30 seconds for positive coverage, for advertising coverage. That would be the price. Including that with the column inches of the articles that we saw in the HuffPost and the Indie Voices, the radio coverage on Gurpur, the TV coverage for Midlands Langar Seva. You're looking at a massive amount of positive media coverage, which we have kind of summarized that being worth about £1 million in total. And that's just the positive media coverage, by the way. We're not including our work on things like the Free Jaggi Now campaign. We're not including our behind-the-scenes work in advising organizations and individuals with their own media statements or interviews. This is just the media work that you've seen out there, we've put out there. You can check it out yourself. You can go on our YouTube channel and you can see half of these things are up there. And what you can also do is on our social media, we post near enough everything that we get coverage for. If you do little things like put out, search on the hashtag Langarweek on Twitter. I did that, and I was like, I could do the whole presentation just on Langarweek. Just have a look, and you'll see that there's a lot that we've done. So with that in mind, combined with our campaigns for Vaisakhi, for Bandi Shor Divas, for Langarweek and Jbeil Day, we're looking at approximate 2.1 million pounds worth of positive PR coverage that Sikh Press Association has gained, and that's on a budget and expenditure of, and this is just largely our wages and the wages of the video editors that that give us their time, that actually their day job is working for Basics of Sikhi, but we're all under the Everything 13 umbrella. You're looking at just about £60,000 spent in the last 12 months for that 2.1 million pounds worth of positive PR coverage. With that in mind, just looking at what's next, so we definitely need a huge website revamp. It's something that's kind of neglected because everyone uses social media more than they go to websites nowadays. So there's going to be a big website revamp. As I said earlier, we're going to focus more on feature articles and columns for our Sikh writers. We got a lot of good ones out there. The problem that we found is doing things as Seva is very hard to do in the media. If, for example, an opportunity comes for somebody to write an article about an issue, let's say Modi, for example, coming down to do a protest, we want somebody to do an article, a newspaper might turn to us and say, okay, can you have that by tomorrow midday? And if we tell somebody who's got a day job, who's only doing it as Seva, can you have that with us by tomorrow midday? 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, actually, no, I was thinking the end of the week. And therefore, we miss our opportunities. So moving forward, we actually need to employ writers at the Sikh Press Association. And that comes with financial support and donation, I guess. Langarweek is our 50th anniversary, so we want to make it bigger, better, more inclusive than ever. And what we're going to be doing in an official capacity, which we've been doing kind of just through the Basics of Sikhi Sevadar network, is and our own network, is bringing in interns and people doing work experience that can also help us shelve our workload. Sikh PA in Canada, as Dr. Ajit Singh mentioned, there has been some real serious issues in the media in terms of depictions of the Sikh community, very readily linked to so-called extremism. So what we're going to plan to do is I'm going to spend a bit of time out in Canada to try and formally establish the Sikh Press Association in Canada. We have Sevadars there that have done lots of work for us. We've gained TV coverage, newspaper coverage, radio coverage very regularly out there. But what we haven't done, which is why we've been successful here in being able to gain a regular work, is being consistent. So what we want to do, what we're planning to do is myself, I'll spend a couple of months out there, do some consistent work out there, keep a continuous stream of news coverage coming to the media about the Sikh community, and then we'll look into how we can set up the Sikh Press Association officially. And with that in mind, this is Gill Singh's quote from last year about the Sikh Press Association. He made a video, it's on our YouTube, you can check it out, and this is exactly what he said about the Sikh Press Association growing. That quote is also in your handouts. If you haven't got one, grab one from outside or give one of our guys a nudge and we'll hand you one, but you can read it there for yourself. In Gill Singh's own words, Sikh Press Association needs to work for the global Sikh community, and the growth is only going to come from Sangat support. Sangat support, how? Funding. It's that simple. I've been here before at the annual reviews and I've talked about you can help in this way and in that way. Essentially, it comes down to funding. If we want to grow, I looked at the Jewish Council just this morning, and I saw they had about 7 full-time staff working in media-related areas, such as campaigning, such as marketing, such as communications. For the last 3 years, we've essentially had 1 employee, that's myself, and as of the start of 2018, we've had Sukh Sodhi come on board. It needs to be much bigger. We're not a national press agency. We get requests all the time from Australia, from Canada, from America, from India, from Kenya, from wherever, that are very valid requests. And we can help them from here. It doesn't matter where we're based. We can help create a press release. We can give some media advice. We can even contact media organizations out in different countries by email. But what we need to do is expand the team. We need that funding. At this point, the way the Sikh Press Association is run, we're not even sure if we're able to exist until 2019, let alone add staff. So if you look at the work that we do and think, yep, they're doing great work, and you know what, if they grew, they could do even more. We need some funding support. We need some financial support to continue growing. And that goes through Everything's 13. I think Everything's 13 are quite reputable in the work that they do, very transparent in the way that they do fundraise. So please bear that in mind. You've got a fundraising card in your handouts. Again, if you want a handout, you can grab one of us outside. Thank you so much all for attending. Thank you everyone, all our speakers for doing the serve of coming forward and speaking. Again, I just emphasize that for us to continue what we're doing and for us to grow, we definitely need that support. You've got the handouts. If you don't, please grab one outside and we'll be open for any questions as well. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.